As we all know, every supervillain needs a supervillain lair. We're all familiar with the classic trope of a supervillain's lair. We remember our Saturday morning cartoons, where the arch enemy of our favorite superhero conceals themselves in their dark, decrepit hideaway, creating plans for world domination. But as always, real life sometimes can prove to be stranger than fiction. Villains certainly exist in the real world, some that show themselves to be far more monstrous than anything ever seen in a Saturday morning cartoon. When we think of a supervillain lair, we think of an eerie hovel, a broken down carnival, or a cobweb-ridden hideaway. Maybe a secret cave deep within a mountain filled with evil plans. The aesthetics of these lairs are as disturbing as the residents, a mirror for the supervillain's dark intentions. But our real-life supervillains claim a different sort of refuge, a supervillain lair that allows them to blend in, to hide in plain sight. Every villain needs a lair, a place set apart from the world where their masks can be shed and darkness may reign unchecked. For years, one such place lay glittering in the Caribbean sun, its secrets camouflaged by palm trees and privilege. Most called it a private paradise, yet the truth, in reality, is far less glamorous. Whispers and rumors spoke of a fortress of silence, a playground for the powerful, and a prison for the powerless. This small island bathing in the beauty of the Atlantic is Little St. James, better known as Epstein's Island, once owned by the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and publicly disgraced when allegations of came forward. Yet, this was far from the first time the man had been accused of doing such things. He had been arrested previously on similar charges, and it all came down to one horrifying suspicion. Jeffrey Epstein was guilty of helping to run a mass-scale exploitation ring. Though the charges and investigation vastly diminished after Jeffrey's suspicious death in 2019, many of us still have questions. Jeffrey perished before the whole truth of his crimes could be revealed. But many aspects of his story continue to plague the minds of individuals in the United States and worldwide. And one of these questions that's never been fully answered is that of Little St. James itself. The sunlight and palm trees of Epstein's Island may be far more than a tropical estate. It was, in reality, a carefully curated stage for manipulation and coercion. In this place, innumerable, ghastly crimes were carried out. But how deep did the Epstein rabbit hole really go? Rumors speak of far more. Hidden tunnels beneath the island, a temple dedicated to occult worship, hidden cameras that captured the faces of the world's elite, and a headquarters for engineering some of the worst crimes against that we'll ever see in our lifetime. What secrets are still hiding on Little St. James? What shadows lurk beneath the mirage of a millionaire's paradise? Who visited the island, and for what reason? Was there truly a blackmail factory partly centered on the island? What malicious god could lurk inside the rumored temple? And who were its fanatical worshippers? On today's episode, we're examining all of that. As always, before we get into this story, I do not plan on going anywhere or doing anything to myself in the near future. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. All of the opinions presented on today's show are solely those of the producer and host of the Conspiracy Files, aka me. I want to thank Sabrin, our wonderful writer and researcher, for helping contribute to this script and for putting in the hard work behind the scenes to help bring this story to you guys. And if you're ever curious about the things that I say and the claims that are made on this show, there is always a resources document posted in the description. So if you want to do your own research and you want to draw your own conclusions aside from my own, just go check out the resources document. It's always there, it's free to access, and it'll point you in the right direction to start your own deep dive. Anyways, y'all, let's get into it, and welcome to the Conspiracy Files. I'm recording this after the Trump Epstein video was released, and I'm really glad that a lot of you guys actually watched that from an unbiased perspective. I tried to avoid adding any ideology into the video or any perspective or any sort of political slant. It was meant to be a deep dive, an iceberg of facts built on the back of facts. And yeah, something that maybe you believe that Trump's fully innocent. I don't know how you possibly could, but Maybe you do. You could still watch the video though and think to yourself, some of these things and some of these narratives that have been spun don't exactly make sense. And in all fairness, I'm going to be doing an episode on Epstein and Clinton, which, as I stated before, and some people didn't even get to this part in the video, I believe in my heart of hearts that Clinton was definitely way more intimately tied to Epstein than Trump. And that's just based not only on, photos and documented White House visits, but the personal relationship itself. And we're going to talk about all of that soon, because not everybody who's listed on Epstein's documents is a bad person or was involved or privy to what Epstein was doing. One thing I want to clear up is some people thought that I got a bunch of comments claiming that I was wrong, that this isn't the actual black book of Jeffrey Epstein's. I know that it's not. I thought I clearly stated that this was a photocopy, but it is that. It is a practical, exact photocopy of what Epstein's black book sort of would have looked like, with these numbers and addresses of individuals that were in his contacts list. Now, not everybody who's in this book was guilty of crimes against the vulnerable, but some of them were. And like I said before, one of my really good friends, his name's Nick Bryant. He is a leading researcher on the Epstein thing. He was the guy that actually got the black book published for the first time in the mass media after getting a copy of it. Nick is a very good friend of mine, and he's taught me a lot about Jeffrey Epstein through our extended conversations while we've been working on an upcoming film project together. But he's worked with so many of the survivors of Epstein's and so many of the people in that world, and he's interviewed them and heard their stories and tried to bring this stuff to light for so many years that I believe him when he talks about it, because if there's anybody really who's going to know a lot about this stuff, it would be Nick. But yeah, to me, Epstein's Island has always been a really, really bizarre place that I feel like is still surrounded by so many unanswered questions. I distinctly remember my friend Kevin, I've talked about this before Epstein was arrested in 2019, my friend Kevin was showing me at my house in South Dakota whole articles that existed online about Epstein and his island, and some decoding that people had done towards the island, trying to understand the things that were seen on the island. And Kevin was telling me this guy is doing this and people are talking about it and they know about it. And then when Epstein was arrested and then ostensibly self-deleted, I knew that this was much bigger than what it was made out to be at the time. And look, that was 6 years ago? And the story's bigger than ever because of the attempt to cover it up that we're seeing from the current administration. If you're truly not guilty of anything, reporting I just saw came out today that Donald Trump's name was allegedly redacted from the Epstein files or whatever documentation they have recently, potentially in preparation for a release of documents, which I think is crazy. Obviously, just because you're friends with somebody that does terrible things, that doesn't mean you're doing terrible things with them. But when you have allegations from people that you have participated in terrible things, and you have people sharing stories about witnessing people that looked really potentially at events, and there are all these stories that people have shared, and you have your own history of behaving a certain way towards women, I think it just becomes, hard to ignore the potential. This is not about politics. It's not about party lines. It has nothing to do with, oh, I'm a Republican, or, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm independent, I don't care. That doesn't matter at all. I don't see this as a party thing at all. I see this as something that just needs to be taken care of like a cancer. They need to cut this out of the American political intelligence system and then move the on and focus on healing. One thing before we begin that I've heard from a lot of people, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or here on YouTube, I get the same exact comment from so many individuals. Well, if Biden was trying to take Trump down, why wouldn't they release these files back then if Trump was in them? First of all, well then, if Trump's not in them, why doesn't he release the files? Why don't they just release the files? You know what I mean? If that's true, and there's nothing that implicates anybody in anything in those files, why not release them right now? If there's only Democrats, why doesn't Trump release them to take them down? Because he clearly has a vengeance inside of him that he wants to take out on individuals in the opposite political party. So there's not only that, but as I've tried to kind of eloquently explain throughout these videos that I've done on Epstein, this is not a one-party issue. It's not like only Democrats or only Republicans were involved with Epstein. This goes beyond politics. This goes to the worlds of Hollywood. This goes to the worlds of finance, of science, of world leaders. None of these things have political parties attached to them. As I said before, if one person's brought in, let's say you bring in Clinton and you depose him and you have him make these statements, Clinton's going to ask for discovery. He could, in effect, open up the entire thing for everybody. Same with Trump. So that's why they're not doing it. I'm not advocating for them to not release the files. I'm saying release the full, transparent, honest truth and let the whole thing burn to the point where we rid ourselves of these people that have these certain proclivities that hold public office or positions of power within society. I know I've talked for a very long time. Today is about the island. So let's get into this because this is a very mysterious part of this entire equation. At first glance, one would call Little St. James a tropical paradise. It is a small island, also known as an islet, with an area of only 70 to 78 acres. It is lush with palm trees and features the breathtaking white sands that the Caribbean is so well known for, creating a truly stunning setting. Located in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James lies just southeast of Great St. James and the much larger island of St. Thomas. Fringed by coral reefs, the Virgin Islands were first purchased from Denmark by the U.S. government during the height of World War I to prevent them from being used as a German submarine base. This small landmass grouping is formed of mountain peaks rising from the floor of the Caribbean Ocean. Visitors flock to this getaway by the thousands each year, with regular tourism bringing in well over 1 million people annually. One would like to think that it's impossible that a gorgeous string of tropical islands could hide one of recent history's most abhorrent criminals. And yet, while tourists from all over the world browsed gift shops and ordered tropical cocktails, more than likely, Jeffrey Epstein was reclining nearby, plotting the of the world's. I took a trip to the Virgin Islands when I was younger with my family, and that's an eerie thought to think that while I was there, so close, Epstein might have been doing whatever on Little St. James right nearby. So Little St. James was listed as being for sale by venture capitalist Archibald Cummins in 1997 for $10.5 million. The island was then purchased in 1998 by a company named LSJ LLC at a significantly reduced price of $7.95 million. Documents would later show that LSJ's sole member was Jeffrey Epstein himself. The island would be listed as Epstein's primary residence, a place he would lovingly call Little St. Jeff. 18 years later, in 2016, he also purchased Great St. James. Prosecutors claim that this purchase was intended to shield Little St. James from any surveillance. Now, Epstein poured millions of dollars into renovating the island, adding numerous buildings and attractions that served a multitude of purposes. Epstein's estate on the island employed 70 staff members by 2008, with the main house being renovated by Amman Resorts' Edwin Tuttle. Unsurprisingly, staff members would later say that Epstein insisted his employees adhere to the heights of discretion and confidentiality. After his death in 2019, the island was valued at $63,874,223, quite a massive leap from the $7 million that Epstein had purchased it for. It appears that the island underwent significant upgrades since being owned by Archibald Cummins. In Epstein's will, signed suspiciously only 2 days before his supposedly unexpected death, all of Epstein's holdings, including the island, were transferred into the 1953 trust, with 1953 referencing Epstein's birth year. The island wasn't listed for sale until March of 2022, but when it was, something staggering occurred. The price of the island, sold alongside Great St. James, jumped from a worth of $10 million to an incredible $125 million. When considering inflation, the price increase should have only been roughly double, around $20 million. However, the price increased by over 1,100%, a hefty price, especially considering that its most recent owner had an incredibly sordid reputation. One would think that this would lower the price, not raise it. Perhaps the sellers were hoping to capitalize on the fact that the island had received so much publicity, even though it was of the most negative sort. One of Epstein's estate lawyers commented that the high price was meant to settle many lawsuits. Yet, when no one would buy the islands, certainly an understandable choice, the price was slashed in half. In 2023, Great St. James and Little St. James were sold to billionaire Stephen Deckoff for $60 million, $3 million less than the valuation of Little St. James, not considering the price of Great St. James at all. But perhaps the most astounding aspect of it all is that Deckoff did not purchase the pair of islands to serve as a residence or a private getaway. Deckoff has plans to change the place, once used for the depraved and of into a public resort. Stephen Deckoff announced that he wants to turn what should be a memorial for young girls into a place that has been known in recent years as Island into a bona fide world tourist destination. Yet, Deckoff claims that this choice will lend the Virgin Islands a great deal of benefit. He wants to respect the local culture and natural beauty of the islands while also promoting economic growth. Deckoff states that he is, quote, tremendously pleased to be able to bring the area a world-class destination benefiting its natural grace and beauty, a state-of-the-art 5-star world-class luxury 25-room resort that will help bolster tourism, create jobs, and spur economic development in the region, end quote. The U.S. Virgin Islands government will also benefit. After numerous legal battles, the Virgin Islands were entitled to half the proceeds from the sale of the islands. Whatever Deckoff plans to do with the properties, the Virgin Islands government wants to do something better. Establish a trust fund to support services and counseling for and this is a far worthier cause than yet another string of resorts in an already popular tourist destination. But what will Deckoff be doing on Little St. James in the process? Spanning the 72 acres of property are innumerable buildings that have to be destroyed if they want to rebuild. The main compound or main house, 4 guest villas, a gym, a seaside massage hut, a reported gas station, and a tiki hut. The island also features a high-capacity water filtration system, along with 2 pools, a private dock, 3 private beaches, and a helipad, according to its real estate listing. But one building that stands out among the rest as particularly strange is the box-like blue-striped building that was once topped with a golden dome. Since the discovery of this building, people have referred to it as the Temple. There isn't much information on what the building was or what it was used for online. However, given everything that occurred there, most people agree that it more than likely had no such positive use. The island has acquired nicknames such as the Island of Sin, Island, and the Isle of Babes. According to his attorneys, many of Epstein's crimes took place on Little St. James, with help from the visitors he brought with him. Moreover, it is said that the island was designed to receive and hold the individuals that Epstein procured, a place where an environment was curated to keep the girls from being able to flee. A suit filed by the U.S. Attorney General for the Virgin Islands claimed that Epstein, quote, used a system of private planes, helicopters, boats, and vehicles to bring young women and girls to his island residence on Little St. James. There, were deceptively subjected to servitude, forced to engage in acts, and coerced into commercial activity and forced labor, end quote. A private island would be, in fact, the ideal place to keep a human imprisoned. Alcatraz, arguably the most famous prison on Earth, was situated on an island and was said to be impossible to escape. One lawsuit states that 2 women tried to do just that. 2 of Epstein's victims allegedly attempted to swim off the island towards St. Thomas, one a girl. Epstein and others quickly located her, though, according to this testimony, and took her passport to prevent her from attempting to escape again. The lawsuit states that another victim who tried to win back her freedom was threatened with physical harm and restraint. Moreover, some scuba divers who swam too close to the island back in the day reported seeing security guards patrolling the water's edge. Were they meant to keep people off the island or to keep captives on? It is undeniable that young women and young girls were held captive on Little St. James, and the reason for their captivity was nothing less than horrific. Now, it should be stated, I feel like also at this point, a lot of people don't really understand how young some of these victims were of Epstein's, because we've seen them all as, full-grown adults that have kind of stepped into their womanhood, have waited because they've been afraid to talk about their experiences and their stories. They've been threatened into silence. Allegedly some people have been as well. But when you look at these lawsuits that are filed and the information that's out there, specifically the lawsuit filed by the U.S. Virgin Islands states that victims were as young as years old. So we're not talking about, young women when you imagine this stuff. We're talking about Now, while Buckingham Palace denies the claim, it's said that the famed victim Virginia Roberts Giuffre was forced to have with Prince Andrew on several occasions after being lured to the island by Jeffrey Epstein. Numerous young women and teenagers were lured to the location, with many traveling to the island on Epstein's aircraft, sickeningly nicknamed the Lolita Express, with Lolita being a reference to a girl from an infamous book and movie. Indeed, Epstein was a convicted by 2010. So how did all of this fly under the radar? Well, it seems that Little St. James served a purpose for that as well. So highly secluded, especially after his 2018 purchase of Great St. James, Little St. James was difficult for the Virgin Islands government to monitor. 2 miles off the coast, it wasn't as simple as walking up to the shore and taking a peek. Additionally, Epstein would weasel his way out of compliance with address verifications, one of the ways that the government was able to inspect the island. He always had excuses and ways to get out of this stuff. In 2018, he didn't even allow investigators to disembark on Little St. James. Instead, he met with them at his office on St. Thomas. The secluded nature of the island made it a perfect hiding spot for this real-life supervillain. But to truly begin the story of Epstein's Island, we must take a brief look at Epstein's crimes overall. Once the facts are known, we can dive into the deep world of rumor. So, Epstein obviously has a long rap sheet for crimes against. His first arrest was in Palm Beach, Florida in 2005 when he was accused of paying a 14-year-old girl for sex. It was hidden under the extremely flimsy veneer of him simply wanting her to give him a massage, something that would become a continuous cover that he and Ghislaine Maxwell used. Ring. Federal prosecutors state that could have begun as early as 2002, after he had bought Little St. James Island in 1998. 3 years at minimum is more than long enough for all of his renovations on the island to have taken place. And with 3 years of potential crimes having gone under the noses of police, there could have been countless numbers of victims who remain unknown to this day. I mean, Epstein started his crimes way long before that, like years and years before that initial arrest. There actually is no real, I don't think, documented start to the crimes, but we know that it was years and years before that. He didn't start this operation in the 2000s. This operation was in full swing in the 90s. Once again, read the book One Nation Under Blackmail to really kind of understand Epstein himself. The crimes usually followed a scheme though. Many women who were at the time of their state that Epstein approached them and offered them to take them to his mansion. Once he had the children in a place that he controlled, like his mansion, he would usually begin by asking them to give him a massage. From there, the encounter would take an even darker turn. In 2006, Epstein was indicted on one state felony charge of solicitation of concerning his 2005 arrest. Epstein was charged concerning one victim, but not in full. Accusations from other victims, many of whom were minors at the time of the crimes, went completely unheard. No one would listen to them. Many Palm Beach police leaders slammed the prosecutor, State Attorney Barry Kreischer, for giving Epstein special treatment. The following year, in 2007, an assistant U.S. attorney submitted a draft indictment that outlined 60 further criminal counts against him. Epstein had caught the FBI's attention, and they initiated a federal investigation involving multiple accusers across the United States. At least that's what they wanted you to believe on the surface. The sweetheart deal, as it would come to be known, was the result of this. In July of 2007, Epstein's lawyers met with the U.S. Attorney's Office for Florida's Southern District. The then top prosecutor, Alex Acosta, we talked about him recently, later President Trump's 2017 pick for Labor Secretary, offered a deal in which almost all of Epstein's troubles would fall by the wayside. The U.S. Attorney's Office was taking a very scrutinizing look into Epstein's life, obviously something he would do anything to prevent. The Attorney's Office offered to end their investigation if Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges and accepted a prison term. Additionally, Epstein would have to register as a offender and, quote, set up a way, end quote, for his victims to receive monetary damages for his crimes. The deal would face overwhelming criticism due to its inclusion of a non-prosecution agreement, or NPA. Because of this NPA, the federal prosecutor's office would grant immunity to Epstein, 4 of his co-conspirators, and, quote, any potential co-conspirators, end quote. So they're not even investigating the co-conspirators at this point. They're giving them immunity because of Epstein's deal. How bizarre is that? It's like saying, hey, we caught this one. We know that there's potentially 4 others. We have their names and information, and we have no idea how many there are, but we're just going to charge this one guy with a really, really minimal thing, and everybody else has immunity for no reason. Why did they do that? Even more troubling, the prosecutors agreed not to tell Epstein's victims about that non-prosecution agreement. In the end, Epstein got out almost entirely unscathed. He pleaded guilty to the state charges, one of which was solicitation of. He registered as a and was sentenced to just 18 months in a minimum security prison. Even then, his sentence was hardly a sentence at all. He was given a special and far more comfortable cell than other prisoners. He was also granted special permissions to leave the facility for up to 12 hours a day, allowing him to go work at a foundation he had recently established. It certainly seemed as if someone was helping Epstein get off easy. His victims, however, continued to pursue their grievances in court. In July 2008, they filed a federal lawsuit under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, stating that they had never been informed about the plea deal. And in 2019, a judge ruled in their favor. Epstein would continue to escape the hands of justice, however. He was released from prison in 2009 after serving less than 13 months of his sentence. From there, he not only settled multiple civil lawsuits with victims, but also seemed to entirely evade the law altogether. This would not last, though. In the next decade, many of Epstein's victims would come forward, one of whom was Virginia Roberts Giuffre. She made some horrifying claims, one of which was that Epstein and his then-girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell orchestrated encounters with her with high-profile individuals, using her as their offering, starting when Virginia was only 17 years old. Before her death, Virginia claimed that politicians, businessmen, academics, and even royalty took part in these encounters. One of her most famous alleged was Prince Andrew, though he and all of the men involved denied the claims. If you want to see a absolutely hilariously bad attempt at trying to lie your way out of these claims, go watch Prince Andrew's infamous, I think it was BBC, interview that he did. I believe it was in late 2019 or 2020, where he's sweating and he claims he has some weird condition where he doesn't sweat, so her story doesn't make sense. The whole thing is laughably bad. I mean, you could tell the dude's just lying, lie after lie after lie. More than that, however, Giuffre accused Epstein and Maxwell of running a massive ring. She was far from the only victim, she stated at the time, and the rabbit hole went deep. As most of us know, this claim was proven true in 2021 when Ghislaine Maxwell would be found guilty of aiding Jeffrey Epstein in operating a ring that preyed on teenagers, children, and young women. In 2017, Virginia Giuffre's initial lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell was settled, a suit that Jeffrey Epstein himself had repeatedly avoided testifying in. The files on the case, though, were of interest to Miami Herald journalist Julie K. Brown. She filed a motion to unseal the records of the case, citing that the public had a right to access these, primarily due to its coverage of against dozens of minors. And this is where the Miami Herald began to take a closer look at Epstein. In 2018, they published a series of investigative reports on him, especially concerning his relationship with Alex Acosta and his plea deal. These reports created a firestorm of interest in Epstein's actions, especially when it was revealed that influential people may have known about or been involved in his crimes against all along. A week after the Herald's report, Epstein reached a last-minute settlement in a defamation case brought forth by yet more victims who claimed to have been at the time of their. This last-minute settlement was convenient, as the resulting court testimony was meant to bring forth many of Epstein's victims, allowing them to speak semi-publicly for the first time. By 2019, though, Epstein could no longer outrun the scrutiny. He was arrested after federal prosecutors in New York decided that Epstein's previous plea deal did not bind them. He was charged in the Southern District Court of New York with one count of. And he wasn't alone, of course. Many are aware that alongside him, Ghislaine Maxwell was also arrested and portrayed as his main accomplice. Maxwell was guilty of recruiting many of the women that she and Epstein Shortly after Epstein and Maxwell's arrests, Alexander Acosta resigned from his position as labor secretary. The public was outraged that a man who allowed to all but walk free was being assigned to such a position of power. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Anyone who glances at the news or spends any time online knows what came next. A month later, on August 10th, 2019, Epstein was found dead under suspicious circumstances in his jail cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. The fallout of the Epstein case continues to this very day. I mean, arguably right now the case is bigger than it's ever been. One of the most significant points of contention in the world of law and order is the public outcry to release the alleged Epstein list, which is a list supposedly containing the names of all of Epstein's clientele. Now, I've stated publicly that I don't believe that there's a list. I think Epstein was clearly way smarter than being a person who would just sit down and write down, who did I bring a child to? This person, this person, this. I don't think he would do that. And if that document ever existed and it implicated anybody powerful, just like the Rolodexes of index cards from people like John David Norman or the files from North Fox Island, the client list, they always disappear, so it would have been gone for a long time. But we could still talk about the names of the people associated with Epstein that allegedly had ties to his schemes. These people include former President Bill Clinton, famed magician David Copperfield, who is actually accused of Epstein linkage and activity before there were a ton of allegations that came out against him from just women in general, and obviously people like Prince Andrew. Other names that are included in the case against Epstein and his ring have included our current president Donald Trump. In his recent campaign, Trump even promised to release the alleged list and further files on Epstein if he were to be elected. But his story has recently changed. The FBI and Department of Justice, according to multiple news outlets, claim there is no Epstein list. And this is like the one time I ever agree with them. I believe that that's true. Furthermore, all the documents on the Epstein case that were recently released by the current administration contained information that was already largely known. Like I stated in my last video about Epstein, the Epstein Files Phase 1 was the biggest slap in the face you could possibly imagine. So they took these documents that were already public and they redacted them further, removed information, and then re-released them and acted like this was some big transparent move. But they were actually re-releasing old information with even less information on the documents than was already out there. I mean, it's just like, you cannot wrap your head around it. It's so crazy. But why would Trump's story change? Well, besides self-preservation on the part of Trump, if he were to be listed as a client somewhere, who else could be being protected? Who visited Epstein's Island, and what proof of these visits do we have? The most considerable portion of what we know about the visitors to Epstein Island, as well as the names of his associates, comes from the names listed in court files. Many of these do not come from the files on Epstein's case, but rather from the files on Ghislaine Maxwell's. At least one attendant admitted that they had been there outright. One of the most famous claims points to Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and a member of the British royal family, being a friend of Epstein's, as well as a... While the most famous accusation places Prince Andrew in Epstein's Manhattan apartment, there's actually some footage here, which should be included, where you can see him lurking in the shadows of the apartment, where he allegedly groped victim Johanna Sjoberg. There is evidence that the Duke of York indeed traveled to Little St. James himself. Even more disturbing, Prince Andrew did so aboard Epstein's private jet, the Lolita Express, where yet more crimes against are alleged to have taken place. Now, Prince Andrew, to his credit, of course, denies that he ever took part in Epstein's crimes. But one email sent to Epstein from a, quote, member of the British royal family, end quote, may prove otherwise. This email that was reported on in the mass media, sent in February of 2011, says, quote, keep in close touch and we'll play some more soon, end quote. The name of the family member is not revealed, but many believe that this was an email sent from Prince Andrew to Epstein discussing playtime, or play some more soon to be exact. Now, Prince Andrew himself admitted that he had traveled aboard the private jet to Little St. James in an interview with the BBC. He's also one of the most famous alleged associates, but Prince Andrew is far from the only shocking name on Epstein Island's guest list. In Ghislaine Maxwell's court files, there's testimony from Maxwell herself confirming that Bill Clinton, former president of the United States, also traveled aboard the Lolita Express to Little St. James. There was also an interesting section of court documents detailing that Maxwell's lawyers wished to debunk a media report that shortly after Clinton left office, he traveled to Epstein's private island. The claim has obviously faced considerable scrutiny, with Maxwell's own lawyers and others attempting to debunk the accusation, and yet it continues to resurface. Could this only be a rumor? Now, President Donald Trump has stated that Bill Clinton visited the private island of Epstein's and did so no fewer than 28 times. It's quite a specific number for President Trump to remember, and quite a claim to make. It could be a bluster or a farce meant to take the heat off of himself, but some Epstein victims are said to have been advised on Clinton's dark proclivities by Epstein himself. According to court records, Miss Johanna Sjoberg states that Jeffrey Epstein informed her that Mr. Clinton, quote, likes them young, referring to girls, end quote. If this is true, there's no reason to think that Clinton did not visit Epstein after leaving office. One of the most significant points of contention about Clinton's visit to the island is that the Secret Service would have been with him. Yet, there are no travel logs from the Secret Service saying that they had visited Little St. James. There is a chance that they would not have joined him. However, former presidents can choose to decline protection after their term has ended. The Secret Service continues to protect presidents and their spouses for life after leaving office, but it is no longer a legal requirement on their part. No one can say what Clinton did after he left office. Former presidents are strictly observed as a matter of national security, but they no longer carry as many responsibilities, and thus they receive less scrutiny. The Secret Service did travel with him on some journeys aboard Epstein's private jet, however, namely in the early 2000s. Clinton was taking humanitarian trips to Africa during this time and brought Epstein along with him. Clinton claimed that the man was a committed philanthropist. The Secret Service's travel logs don't note any dubious behavior aboard the plane. The most straightforward answer here is that there was no illegal activity, and that they did not visit the island. But another answer exists, one that's just as simple and as obvious. Clinton, a man with much power and reach, told them what and what not to report. Those are just allegations that you need to consider. No man in power is going to say outright that they were in close contact with a convicted, much less that he visited the man's home on a private island in the Caribbean, especially now that we know that there were girls that were held there repeatedly. So perhaps Clinton is guilty of more than Maxwell's lawyers would like to admit to. Or perhaps, as previously stated, it's nothing but bluster from another man under the spotlight. We're going to talk, though, about Clinton and his associations in an upcoming episode, and they are way deeper and way darker than we're going to discuss here. We're focusing solely on the island. Now, to Donald Trump's credit, there is no credible information that has placed him on the island. And very recently, he actually stated out loud that he never had the privilege of visiting Epstein's private island. Of course, if you're going to dissect that semantically, it's an incredibly insensitive and poor choice of words there. Never having had the privilege to visit the... Perhaps it was meant as sarcasm or even a joke, but either way, that phrase left a bad taste in the mouths of all who heard the remark. Trump was indeed invited, however, a point of contention that nobody can ignore or deny. I mean, Trump even said it himself. You see, Trump states that he declined the invitation in a moment of, quote, good judgment, end quote. But as with all of those accused of visiting Epstein's island, who would admit to it? And keep in mind, this is a whole thing to think about. The Justice Department, the FBI, just stated that Epstein was essentially innocent of to powerful people. They have publicly claimed in their story is that he worked alone, essentially with Maxwell, and he was a serial. So then, why would Donald Trump be saying in the media that it was good judgment for him to not go to the island? Why would he, be denying that he went to the island? Why would he be denying the relationship if what his Justice Department has said is true, that Epstein never would have offered him someone to do things with or to... It makes absolutely no sense when you actually deconstruct these things from the face value that they're presented at, because it just makes no sense. And this whole thing should go to show you clearly that what I've been talking about this whole time on this channel is true. You cannot trust every word that a government says. I mean, they're just the government. They're not God. These are just individuals like you or I. And obviously there are going to be secrets that people need to uphold, images and reputations that they need to protect, criminal charges that they need to make disappear or prevent from being filed. Obviously, I mean, if you actually sit there and you think to yourself, the government has never lied about anything, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's just an absolutely insane claim to make. In one news article by WTRF, no less than 90 names are listed as being named in Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's court files. Now, it's a known fact that Epstein was in contact with influential people worldwide, including allegedly Jordanian princes and prime ministers, all of whom were listed in his infamous address book. Naomi Campbell, Leonardo DiCaprio, David Copperfield, Kevin Spacey, George Lucas, Al Gore, Cate Blanchett, and even Stephen Hawking are listed in the court files. Now, I will say there are no credible accusations necessarily against the previous individuals, but who amongst the many names listed actually visited the island itself? Now, Stephen Hawking might be a surprising name for most to hear as being associated with a scandal. He was a world-renowned Cambridge physicist, but he was accused at one point of participating in an underage on Little St. James. That's a quote. In one 2015 email to Ghislaine Maxwell that was reported on by the mass media, this is coming from an article in The Guardian. I just want to make that point very clear. Jeffrey Epstein, in his email, asked Ghislaine Maxwell to offer a reward for proof that this claim was false. Virginia Giuffre herself was the victim who made this claim, and so Ghislaine Maxwell was tasked with finding friends of Virginia's who she could use to attempt to discredit the allegation. The email reads, quote, "G-Max, you can issue a reward to any of Virginia's friends, acquaintances, family that come forward and help prove her allegations are false. The strongest is the Clinton dinner and the new version in the Virgin Islands that Stephen Hawking participated in an underage." End quote. So the allegations themselves come from Virginia Giuffre, who's a well-known figure within this Epstein scandal, and it isn't exactly a claim without merit, because there is hard evidence that shows that Hawking himself did visit Epstein's Island. During a trip to St. Thomas Island in 2006, Stephen Hawking was photographed attending a barbecue on Little St. James. This is not up for debate, this is a fact. Accompanying Stephen Hawking were 3 Nobel Prize laureates. These people were unnamed, but Epstein went to the trouble of having a submarine modified so that Hawking could take a tour of the seabeds nearby. Compared to other attendants of Epstein Island, Stephen Hawking had very little in the way of damning evidence that linked him to actual crimes. Now, I will state, Hawking has never been, formally accused or, I believe, to the knowledge that we have, investigated of having participated in this stuff. And I do want to make this clear, when you bring up people's names in relation to this stuff, a lot of this is unproven, but it comes from actual documents and photos and real evidence. So the stuff isn't just being made up. One attendee, David Copperfield, though, the famous magician, was said to have asked some concerning questions while on the island. In a deposition, Epstein victim Johanna Sjoberg claimed that she had been invited to a dinner on Epstein's Island and that one of the attendees, reportedly, that night would be David Copperfield. While at the dinner, Sjoberg states that the famous magician, quote, did some magic tricks, end quote, but afterward, he asked her a disturbing question. According to Johanna, David Copperfield allegedly asked her if she was, quote, aware that girls were getting paid to find other girls, end quote. Sjoberg also states that while at the party, she saw another girl whom she had never met or seen before. She continues by saying the girl looked young. If someone's looking for hard evidence that shows that David Copperfield was on Little St. James at one point, they need only to look at his personal life. David Copperfield proposed to model Claudia Schiffer on the island in 1993, only 3 months after meeting her. Though the pair never officially married, it seems he found Little St. James significant enough to use as the location for his proposal. While this famous magician may be easy to place on the island and actually has a track record of allegations coming from multiple women of impropriety and Others are more difficult to pin down. Les Wexner, for example, the Victoria's Secret mogul, was a primary client of Epstein's money management firm, J. Epstein & Company. While it is said that he visited the island, there is no hard evidence out there to suggest that Les did. Curiously, though, employees of Epstein's property say that they saw Victoria's Secret models on the premises on multiple occasions. If the models employed by his business were spotted on the island, it is possible that Wexner, who is documented to be one of Epstein's closest acquaintances, visited as well. Now, Wexner, though, wasn't the only wealthy businessman ever accused of visiting Little St. James, though. The former boss of Barclays, Jess Staley, is also said to have visited the island, according to reporting from the BBC. Jess Staley resigned from his position at the UK-based bank after financial regulators discovered his relationship with Epstein was far more personal than Staley had admitted. The two were not just simply associates. Over 1,200 emails had been exchanged between Staley and Epstein over the years. What would give Staley cause to speak to Epstein so frequently? And why would he lie about it and claim that they didn't have this relationship that it was documented now that they actually had? Those are questions that we still don't have answers to. And these are only a sampling of the powerful and wealthy people that were said to have visited the island. Though these names are boggling, there should be hundreds. Epstein's guest list to the island, though, appears to have been tightly sealed. But journalists from the technology publication Wired wouldn't let that slide. Using their connections and knowledge about how to access publicly available information in a recent report, the group began digging. And indeed, the guest list for Epstein's Island should be far larger. Wired discovered that nearly 200 unique mobile devices pinged on the island before Epstein's death. They even left invisible data trails leading back to their homes. Wired discovered numerous trips of wealthy individuals who traveled to Little St. James, affluent and influential people who were seemingly undisturbed by Epstein's status. Remember, at this point, he was a convicted, and the data was gathered by Near Intelligence, a location data broker that used tracking data collected by mobile apps. The coordinates given by Near Intelligence were able to pinpoint people's locations to, quote, within a few centimeters of space, end quote. Because of this, Near Intelligence was able to examine which areas of the island were visited the most. The dock, of course, is where most visitors arrived. Generally, visitors would either be shuttled from St. Thomas or arrive by helicopter on Little St. James itself. Afterward, they moved on to visit the many beaches, pools, and cabanas that dot the island. People also visited that strange blue and white striped building that stands beside the waterfront. The tracking data was collected from early July 2016 to July 6, 2019. Needless to say, many people appeared to have visited the island during that time. Of course, some of them could have been employees, which is why Wired was hesitant to release any names. However, others seemed to have been visiting from quite a distance away, which was unlikely if they were employees. After the visitors left the island, they continued to be tracked by Near. 166 separate locations were marked by recent visitors all over the world, including places such as Texas, New York, Michigan, and Massachusetts. Indeed, some of the visitors, as reported, were incredibly wealthy, with the exceptional accuracy of Near Intelligence's tracking data placing some of the visitors as returning to large residences in Martha's Vineyard, where the median sale price of a home is $1.27 million. An overwhelming number of the coordinates place visitors in gated communities and mansions. Still, they also point to nightclubs in Miami, Florida, and Fifth Avenue in New York City, just across the street from Trump Tower. More disturbing, the coordinates also lead to other properties owned by Epstein, such as his 8,000-acre ranch in New Mexico and his waterfront mansion in Palm Beach. His Palm Beach property and the New Mexico ranch were stated to have been a location where numerous were and held to be abused, just as his island was. The coordinates don't only point to locations in the US, however. They also point to Kiev in Ukraine, the Cayman Islands, and even Sydney, Australia. This tracking data, though, is notably slim when it comes to Europe, and Wired states that this is likely due to Europe's strict privacy laws. Nevertheless, Near Intelligence gave Wired more than enough information to prove that Epstein's guest list was far longer than anyone is willing to admit. I mean, think about that, guys. This is actual data that can place individuals to almost the centimeter of where they were, showing that they came from tons of different countries all over the United States to Epstein's Island. So these weren't employees. These were people clearly being invited by Epstein to the island. Now, it's not fair to say that all of the people who visited did nefarious things, obviously. But who were these people and why were they there? There aren't any huge public events that I can, remember or find information on really in those years. So it doesn't make sense. And so many of these people were visiting, 1, 2, 3 at a time, small groups or individuals. So it doesn't make sense. It's not like these were big gatherings. But what happened once those visitors arrived? Epstein had to have a reason for bringing all of these influential people to his island from around the globe, right? So what occurred once these moguls and celebrities landed ashore? Why would he go through the trouble and danger of revealing his supervillain lair to so many people? How could this possibly benefit him? The FBI would like us to believe that there was no evidence that Epstein was using his ring to blackmail the wealthy and powerful, but victim Virginia Giuffre claims otherwise. In her diary, it is said that Epstein did just that, videotaping her encounters where she was, quote, by other men, end quote. Virginia stated the explicit use of these tapes was for blackmail. She also confirms that in Epstein's private residences, cameras were hidden in practically every nook and cranny, which would track visitors' every move. In her diary, Giuffre stated, quote, I used to be watched by Epstein's hidden cameras, which I have seen myself. The FBI has the archive footage showing me being by other men used as blackmail, end quote. And Giuffre's claims cannot be dismissed as baseless accusations. In fact, she won a lawsuit against the disgraced financier for proving at least some of her allegations in court. When Epstein's residences were raided, quote, large black binders holding labeled CDs as well as hard drives, end quote, were found, some of which were located inside of his supposed massage rooms. Federal prosecutors also said CDs were found in a safe that featured photographs, some with girls. During the raids on his properties, authorities discovered multiple hidden cameras, but these weren't only in the Manhattan townhouse. Some of these were located inside the buildings on Little St. James. Giuffre was not the only victim who claimed that she was used to blackmail influential people. Britain's Sarah Ransom also accused Epstein of secretly filming her encounters with high-profile figures to use as blackmail. A woman named Jane Doe 3 states that she was also forced to have with, quote, a host of powerful men, end quote, to blackmail them, one of whom was a well-known prime minister. However, the victim states she was also by US politicians and leaders from all over the world. Her statements, gleaned from unsealed court documents, were that Epstein required Jane Doe number 3 to, quote, describe the events that she had with these men so that he could potentially blackmail them, end quote. Jane Doe number 3 also says that he used her to ingratiate himself with these influential people for financial gain. Perhaps the purpose of his blackmail was to ensure he received payment, keeping his financial situation current for the many residences he owned and the businesses he operated. Epstein himself was curiously silent on the matter when asked outright. One batch of court documents revealed 1,400 pages of court depositions to the public, and in many, Epstein goes completely silent when asked about the claims of blackmailing famous men. The court records that were released reveal a damning section in Epstein's 2016 sworn deposition, where he repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment, exercising his constitutional right against self-incrimination. Epstein refused to answer any questions about blackmail, repeatedly responding by stating the word fifth over 500 times. This bizarre and dramatic response is damning enough on its own, but Epstein is said to have been proven capable of blackmail in the past. In 2010, Bill Gates met and began an extramarital affair with a Russian bridge player described only as, quote, a young woman, end quote. Epstein met her in 2013, after which he offered to send her to software coding school. However, in 2017, he suddenly emailed Bill Gates and requested that the wealthy businessman reimburse him for the cost of the course. This unusual request followed Epstein's unsuccessful attempt to recruit Gates for a multi-billion-dollar charity fund. The implication was clear. Gates' not participating in Epstein's business plans was unacceptable, and Epstein was informing Gates that he knew all about his secret relationship with the young woman in 2010. If Gates didn't continue to associate with him, he would tell the world. Epstein's victims don't only say that he blackmailed the rich and powerful, though. Epstein also blackmailed the victims themselves, according to a woman named Priscilla Doe, who states she was throughout the late 2000s. Her claims are like those of other victims, that she was given up to Epstein's friends for massages, and that these friends were given permission from Epstein to abuse her. Doe stated that to force compliance, Epstein, quote, maintained damaging files on many of the young female victims, end quote. The rich and powerful men of the world were not the only ones in the photos. The victims themselves were just as much involved in Epstein's alleged blackmail scheme. Remarkably, a substantial amount of evidence supporting the blackmail theory has accumulated. The CDs, the hidden cameras, and the victim testimonies all point to this being the case, along with all the connections and allegations and the intelligence connections and the friendships and Alexander Acosta essentially being told, leave Epstein alone, he's intelligence. I mean, this is a thing that through investigative journalism has been practically proven. And yet the FBI claims there was zero blackmail. Current media is rife with the parroted headline, quote, DOJ memo says no evidence of Jeffrey Epstein's client list or blackmail, end quote. That's coming from that memo released in early July of 2025. The memo was not lengthy, only about 2 pages long, and yet it attempted to neatly wrap the entire Epstein scandal in a tight little bow. Epstein, according to an exhaustive investigation by the Justice Department and FBI, had no client list, never blackmailed anyone, and had no other uncharged associates. Furthermore, it shot down the popular theory that Epstein was well in custody. This is quite a departure from what Trump's cabinet had to say during the earliest months of his term. So, was a part of Epstein Island's purpose to be the collection of blackmail, to lure these powerful, influential people to the island, to an environment completely and rigorously controlled by Epstein and whoever else was working with and for him? I mean, the guy could have planted cameras in the bushes, in the trees, anywhere. I mean, it's documented that there were cameras on Epstein Island in all these kind of compromising places. So that definitely was, in my mind, one of the reasons why Epstein Island existed. You could also talk about there's this kind of theory and pederasty that I've studied and seen a lot of these people talk about. Like when you look at North Fox Island back in the day with Frank Sheldon, that was one of the early episodes of the show. That was the original Epstein Island. It's in northern Michigan, in Lake Michigan. Rich guy was basically onto that island, flying them out there. He had a ring of individuals that were abusing the kids, filming them, taking photographs. I've worked with some of the victims that were actually victimized on the island. It's definitely not the same as Epstein, but it's very similar. Some of the people that were involved in Sheldon's circle, Frank Sheldon being the owner of that island, kind of the Epstein of that story, they advanced this theory. There was actually an organization that was practically dedicated to this theory that was established called the Ocean Living Institute. This was incorporated in New Jersey with help from a very mysterious figure named Adam Starchild. That whole story is incredibly convoluted, but essentially what these pederasts were trying to do back then, this is in the 70s, mid to late 70s, I guess early 70s when they were still talking about all of this in the US. They were discussing like living freely at sea, like the laws of certain lands wouldn't apply to them. They'd be on essentially maritime law. That was one theory that they were trying to work out. Like, how can we live at sea or establish our own little havens where we can do whatever we want to away from the scrutinizing eyes of whether it's US authorities or whoever. So that was one theory. I don't know if Sheldon applied that to North Fox Island because technically it was still in Michigan. Same with Epstein and how it's in the US Virgin Islands. I don't know, but I do know that for a fact that train of thought did exist in that community for years. But now it's time to turn to the strange structures on Epstein Island, the tunnels, and what they could have been used for. And I have so many questions, like what purpose does the box-like building serve? Where are these tunnels? And what evidence is there that they even exist? Are there occult symbols on the island? And what is the strange sundial that people have noticed in photographs of the island? Well, the first matter of enormous interest is the tunnel system that's claimed to have been seen on the island. Netizens have flocked to social media since the Epstein case began, looking to tear down the secretive walls of Epstein's supervillain lair. They were able to do so to a certain extent, with some help from foot soldiers on the ground. One drone was able to take several flights over Little St. James on multiple different dates, fittingly named Rusty Shackelford, a reference to a character from the TV show King of the Hill. Rusty Shackelford is an alias used by the character Dale Gribble, a man known for his exceptionally conspiracy-minded nature. The drone footage was unfortunately removed from YouTube, as it stated the video violated their content policies. However, screenshots of the video were preserved by netizens and can be reviewed. The Rusty Shackelford drone published 63 videos by the end of 2019. One video in particular gained over 5,000 comments, as netizens dropped theory after theory. One was that the small and shuttered windows pointed to hidden activities. Another was that occult practices were taking place on the island. Another was the disturbing belief that the island could be full of dead bodies. And the last was that the island was full of tunnels and contained buried rooms. Aerial maps of the island highlight several key areas of interest, including the primary service area. On the eastern side of the island, an area is dedicated purely to service buildings. These are presumably generators, housing for the desalination system, workshops, storage, sewage management, and the like. One thing caught the attention of people that saw footage and photographs of this area, though. Some of the buildings are partly buried. They seem to be simply hills, only visible as buildings when viewed from the correct angle. However, one building stands out for being particularly unusual. It nearly escaped notice as it's carefully hidden, blending in with the island's shrubbery. It initially appeared to be a wall, when a later drone video revealed a set of open doors leading to a secret building. On one of the drone's visits, dated September 11th, 2019, the drone was able to see inside one of the partially buried buildings. Within was a surprisingly spacious area, partly filled with equipment and boxes. And yet, at the rear of the space, another set of double doors was visible. It seemed to lead to a space even deeper, cut into the hillside. The door had a lockable handle. What could these double doors lead to? Another set of double doors on the right wall seemed to lead to a cupboard, but a second entrance was observed that could explain the double doors at the back of the room. It was located on the left wall of the space, smaller, partly hidden behind boxes. It seemed to be the face of a dumbwaiter. A dumbwaiter, for those who are unfamiliar, is a small elevator-like cupboard used to transfer items from one level to another, or vice versa. This service area was on the ground level, with the buildings having no upper floors. So, why would a dumbwaiter be needed? Moreover, why did the doors at the back of the room lock from the outside? Could there have been a basement in this hidden building, one that needed lockable doors? And why would a dumbwaiter be required to transfer items to and from it? People began to wonder if this wasn't some kind of entrance to a tunnel system. They also began to wonder if it wasn't some horrific holding cell for Epstein's network. The service area also seems to feature multiple ventilation grates and piped outlets. They could simply be vents for generator rooms, but some people online believe otherwise. One reason for this is that there seem to be other underground entrances across the island. The main house complex appears to be a one-story structure from the air with paved grounds and pool cabanas situated beside it. And yet, when looking at its western face, one can see a lower story to the construction. A single door stands out as odd, built into a wall beneath the paved pool complex, a set of stairs extending from it. There's no telling what lies beyond this door, nor how far it stretches into the island, only that it appears to lead beneath the ground level paved pool area. More buried buildings are also visible in the drone footage, with doors that appear to lead directly into the island itself. Some viewers argue that they're simply buildings meant to house water, power, and sewage utilities, but this fails to satisfy the suspicions of others. One building is particularly conspicuous. E2, as it's labeled, looks to only be a simple pergola, yet nearby, two entrances to what could be sheds are buried in the hillside. Oddly, there also seems to be a pathway down the cliff face near these two entrances with a rock pool at its foot. When one of these entrances were discovered to be open during a later drone flight, the craft moved in closer to see what was inside. All it managed to see were small storage spaces. However, what catches some viewers by surprise is that there appears to be a concrete wall within, which was only recently built. In other words, the walls seem to have sealed something away behind it. A problem exists, though, with the theory of Epstein Island and its tunnels. Blasting away the rocky surface of the land to create the tunnels would be a very loud process, and it would likely be noticed or remembered by at least somebody outside Little St. James. Not only that, but where would all this debris go after being blasted away? If the debris were simply thrown into the sea, it would be starkly noticeable. Several theories may offer an explanation. Rocks line every path and road on Epstein Island. A typical aesthetic feature of Little St. James is the presence of large stones or boulders. Many rock walls were also constructed, which would, if the theory's true, serve to dispose of some of the blast refuge. Additionally, rocks cover significant water reticulation efforts, disposing of yet more refuse. But the most significant dumping ground for the rock and dirt may be the strange tennis court area. In one section of the island, far inland, appears to be a tennis court-shaped area with a berm or raised area of land 20 feet high and almost completely surrounding it. There was indeed a tennis court there in 2016, but it lasted for only a short while before being demolished. Since then, it seems to be unused land. This berm, 20 feet high and encompassing a large area, could have been made to dispose of the massive amounts of rock and dirt excavated to create the tunnels. Sadly, however, we may never know if these tunnels existed nor what they were used for. 3 weeks before the Miami Herald expose was published, which would lead to his arrest, Jeffrey Epstein ordered a $100,000 cement truck shipped express to Little St. James. Epstein, to be specific, ordered a Carmix 5.5 XL self-loading concrete mixer on November 7, 2018. He seemed to be in a rather large hurry to get it too, as he paid up front with an express bill of lading to ensure it would arrive as soon as possible, even if it meant being responsible for the machine if it was damaged in transit. But why would Epstein want a cement truck, and why would he be in such a hurry to get it? The Daily Mail UK reported on the story. They contacted shipping experts who told them that, quote, the possibility that it was used to literally cover up evidence cannot be discounted, end quote. So, was the cement truck used to fill in the tunnels or create the cement walls? It is possible that Epstein was tipped off about the story that would lead to massive scrutiny on his life, and so made a decision to hide any evidence of his crimes before he was caught. One of the reasons the tunnel claim has gained so much traction is Epstein's involvement in the company's advertising of survival pod infrastructure. Epstein was listed as being on both the finance board and futurists board of the Lifeboat Foundation until shortly before his death. This organization's webpage shows a complex bunker system, advertised as its Life Shield bunkers. It claims to be a completely buried habitat large enough to house entire families, with multiple floors and massive amounts of living space. So, could Epstein have leveraged his position with this very specific company to influence them to build him a bunker of his own? Are these what the strange entrances lead to? The illustration of the bunker on the company website shows an entrance eerily similar to the buried building, with its double doors. We know that Epstein had no lack of money or connections to make his disturbing dreams a reality. But why tunnels or a bunker? What would he need with them? Epstein already had many buildings at his disposal that he could have used to hide his victims. There was a massive main house complex, along with many other smaller buildings. Well, tunnels would allow Epstein to wander the grounds unseen. It would allow him to hide himself as well as others. We all know the man was guilty of horrific crimes, but other elements of the island may point to something else entirely. The tunnels are only the beginning of a list of disturbing constructs. The others force us to ask an even more distressing question. Was Little St. James the site of occult rituals? Now, this claim may seem fantastical on its surface, and I know some people are immediately going to freak out and say, here he goes again, he's talking about this and this and this. But just listen to what I'm saying. Draw your own conclusion. I'm just pointing to facts of what's on the island and theories people have because it's never been explained. It's weird stuff. Now, this may seem like a far-fetched and unusual thing to consider. People may call it a paranoid suggestion, but it begins to seem less so when one considers the location of one of these underground entrances. On a cliff face overlooking the ocean, a door leads into the earth of the island. Just above it stands the strange box-like building with a golden dome. The building that has come to be known as the Temple. This door, hidden in the earth, may be an entrance to a secret basement, or in other words, a dungeon of sorts beneath the temple. This is the construct that has captured the attention of many people across the world. The building itself is a cube, marked by blue and white stripes, set upon a paved area with red geometric markings. It once had a large golden dome perched atop its roof, reminiscent of an Islamic turba or funerary building. The decorations and structure appear to be Ottoman in style, strongly resembling the buildings found in places like Aleppo, Syria. Some people have pointed out that it resembles a bathhouse found in that very city. The building has windows at opposite ends, as well as one set of glass doors facing the sea. On the opposing wall, a set of elaborate wooden doors appear to be present, yet they may not be doors at all. It's been proven that the doors are an optical illusion. The doors appear from the outside to be 3D and functional, but in fact, when one actually approaches them, you can see that they're only decorative. These elaborate doors were literally painted on the walls. The drone, which captured extensive footage of Little St. James, was able to look inside the temple, with one photograph displaying a nearly empty room. Inside, various items lay scattered, and a painter's scaffolding is erected. Alongside it, 2 stacks of small mattresses lay on the ground. The temple's face was once allegedly flanked by golden statues, one of which was said to be Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. Atop its roof, 2 others allegedly perched, carved in the likeness of birds. Some say these birds resembled owls. Internet sleuths have claimed to have discovered that this odd structure differs from what Epstein's original planning permit proposed. He had initially stated that he wanted to build an octagonal music pavilion, but instead, he built the bizarre building known as the Temple. As I stated earlier, Business Insider has stated that that was simply a private study or music room. However, others believe it could have been an entrance to a secret underground lair, a burial ground for his deceased parents, or even an altar to an Egyptian deity. Nowadays, the dome is gone, blown away by a hurricane, and as are the statues. The entire building has been painted white, with the blue stripes no longer visible. Some say that the building was a small mosque, as Epstein did have connections in the Middle East. Others, though, subscribe to the theory that this temple hides a ritual chamber beneath it. There could be one unlikely person who sheds light on this subject, though, that piano tuner named Patrick Barron. Barron visited the island twice, in August 2012 and October 2012. While on Little St. James, he was able to allegedly see the temple in person. The large glass doors on the building faced south, he stated, and atop the roof were statues that resembled gargoyles. At this point, he says that the color of the building was a dull pewter. It did not yet have its famous blue and white stripes. Barron remembered the interior of the temple clearly. The floors were wood, covered with a large rug. It also, unsurprisingly, had 2 levels. The first was 4 to 6 feet at ground level, and the rest on a slightly raised platform accessed by a single step. On the eastern wall was a gray sofa. Directly ahead of the glass door stood a 10-foot-long desk of dark wood. Behind the desk were several tall bookcases. Then, of course, there was the piano, a Rudolf Wurlitzer. Above it was a portrait of Epstein and the Pope, a man who Barron states resembled Pope John Paul II. But even with the seemingly benign appearance of the room, Barron himself described it as a lair. Perhaps it was only because the building was associated with Epstein, or maybe it was because of a disturbing aura this building seemed to incite in him. When urban explorers began to infiltrate the island, it was noted that the temple was boarded up. They claimed that the building looked incredibly cheap, as if it could have been made for around $5,000. Such a cheap building could indeed serve as the marker for an entrance to an underground tunnel system, or even a chamber for ungodly acts. Urban explorer Andy Bracco states that he managed to gain access to the island in August 2020 and indeed visited the temple but was unable to get inside. Bracco attests that he was able to look inside even though the building was locked up tight. He stated that he saw a spiral staircase descending downwards, which he believed allowed access to a tunnel system below. However, there's no photographic or video evidence to support this claim. But much of what was proven true in the Epstein case initially began as just a rumor. Back outside the temple, some aerial shots of the location appear to reveal what could be symbols or patterns in the geometric markings on the pavement. Some people have expressed the belief that these markings spell something, as if it's a calling card or a sign, able to be only read by those with the esoteric knowledge of their meaning. Some have also expressed curiosity about the painted door, which seems to symbolically keep people inside rather than keep others out. The door is painted with a crossbar on the outside, set in the locked position. Some believe that this means the building was only the top of a holding cell, and that Epstein's victims were held below. Moreover, some claim that they have seen CCTV cameras and video monitoring that captured footage of ritual chambers beneath the temple. Unfortunately, there's no solid proof. No one has ever been able to gain entrance to this reported underground holding cell or chamber and record the evidence. The biggest reason for this, though, some claim, is that cement truck Epstein had delivered to the island shortly before he came under fire. But is there any truth to an occult aspect of the island? Well, some point to the sundial, a massive circle bordered by 13 benches, as evidence. Illustrated on the sundial is the face of Alexander Slade's Masonic Man, a painting of the sun with 16 rays patterned around it. Slade's Masonic Man is a well-known engraving, dated 1754, and has been frequently reproduced over the years. The engraving is of the figure of a man formed entirely of Masonic materials. These, of course, pertain to the Order of the Freemasons, the Freemasons being that fraternal order dedicated to fostering personal growth, community, and building strong friendships. But to many, the Freemasons are obviously regarded as a shadowy organization. There are also many claims that the Freemasons are not a benign organization at all, but a malicious order that secretly conducts some sort of rituals behind closed doors. Now, we're not going to get into the Freemasons here, but Epstein being associated with the Freemasons, even through art, is just a really weird little twist or fact in all of this. And what doesn't seem to help is the fact that the Freemason symbolism continues to appear in unexpected places. Some people actually believe that the Freemasonry Royal Arch is depicted on Epstein Island, with the shape of the door on the temple, as well as the paint patterns around the windows, which allegedly resemble the symbol. People also point out old satellite imagery of the island, captured by Google Earth, which shows a black and white checkered floor, a symbol that is also known to be associated with Freemasonry and Masonic temples. I've been inside of Masonic temples for my ghost hunting before. I've seen the black and white checkered floors. So, what is Freemason symbolism doing on Epstein's Island, the secret lair of a convicted pedophile? Could Epstein have had ties to the Freemasons? And what does this have to do with the occult symbolism? Now, some people have claimed to be able to tie the Bohemian Club and Bohemian Grove to Epstein Island, like the cremation of care ceremony, and some people have claimed that the owls allegedly seen at Epstein's place him with the Bohemian Club individuals because of their gigantic owl at Bohemian Grove, which is allegedly Moloch, and we've talked about that before in the past. I've never seen actual hard proof of any of this. It is interesting to kind of analyze it in that sense, but the sundial itself is one piece of iconography that many believe is a link to the Freemasons. Of course, this could simply be a portrait of the sun, which is incredibly fitting for a sundial. Yet, why was it crafted in that particular style? Why would the Masonic Man be Epstein's choice? Certain statues also struck observers as suspicious. Urban explorers found it incredibly strange that the island was dotted with gargoyles. The small stone gargoyles were humanoid creatures with animal faces, their heads topped by thorns. This is a bit out of place on a supposed island getaway. Indeed, the piano tuner also stated that when he visited the temple in 2012, gargoyles were perched on the roof, not owls or birds. These aren't the only disturbing decorations on the island, however. Urban explorers discovered a peculiar chair crafted entirely from horns and animal hide hidden beneath a tarp. Horns and animal hide have been associated with all sorts of different groups, rituals, and beliefs over the years, from druidism to, as some have claimed online, even satanic ritual worship. Yet still, none of this obviously proves anything. It only turns an even more dubious eye upon Epstein and the secrets he took to his grave. But the alleged tunnels, the sundial, and the temple aren't the only strange things about Little St. James. Especially in one case of a woman named Jessie Zibatar. She claims, and we could talk about this at length, that she is basically a survivor of satanic ritual. In her appearance on a podcast, she discusses in depth her theories on what she believes and what she claims to know about the meaning of everything on Epstein Island. It's a very compelling listen. I'm not advocating and saying that it's 100% true because there is no documentation or photos or any actual hard evidence, but she connects a lot of dots and basically alleges that the temple and the whole alleged underground tunnel system have to do with energy harvesting and all these bizarre kind of spiritual things. So if you want to look down that rabbit hole, this is already a very long episode, but I would definitely recommend you listen to the podcast. It's pretty crazy stuff. But Jeffrey Epstein himself has had a record of shipping concerning items to his island in the past. For instance, on September 9th, 2013, he received a dentist's chair from China. The chair had a rotatable ceramic spittoon, an operating light, a saliva ejector system, and high-power suction. Anyone who's been in a dentist's chair can attest that it isn't the most comforting place to be. But a dentist's chair in the home of Jeffrey Epstein, hidden away on a secluded island, must be the absolute height of horror. Yet he ordered something else, which is even more disturbing. In 2008, shortly after his non-prosecution agreement was reached, he ordered an industrial-size shredder. This machine was able to destroy CDs, whole 3-ring binders, and hardbound documents. A concerning note is that one of the most significant challenges that prosecutors had in prosecuting Epstein in the 2000s was the lack of documents that proved his guilt. Epstein also had a private ambulance on the island. But for what? Why would a place of only 72 or so acres need a private ambulance? And what use would it be, cut off from any roads that could actually lead to a hospital? The oddities and enormity of the dark aura of Epstein's island continue to shock and disturb so many years after his demise. We can only guess at what evils occurred or continue to happen there to this day, wild conjecture being our only recourse. Now, as we step away from the tangled web spun around Epstein's island, the questions and confusion only seem to multiply. Was it simply the grotesque playground of a wealthy finance guy, or a stage for a much darker play? Something that he mandated stay concealed at all costs. From whispers of hidden tunnels and allegations of ritual chambers, to a blue and white striped building called the Temple standing as an unsolvable riddle. Almost every inch of the island bears breadcrumbs that draw one deeper into a maze of uncertainty. You see, for every breadcrumb that's found, someone seems to sweep the rest clean. Every answered question leads to still more, each greater than the last. The truth is buried beneath years of silence, beneath sealed court documents, beneath deals struck in darkness and evidence that was destroyed long, long ago. The answers, though, lie in the labyrinth of pain and misery beneath the blood and madness of Epstein's crimes. Because at the end of the day, no matter how close we shine the light onto Epstein's life, those in power seem poised to push that light away, to dim the illumination of justice. Epstein may be gone, but the questions he left behind live on, a constant presence in our daily lives. Those who continue to look too closely are rejected, silenced, or discouraged at every turn. The matter at hand now is who is brave enough to continue asking these questions. Because the moment that we stop asking, the moment we stop talking about this stuff, the moment we stop bringing it up, the demons that stood beside the abhorrent criminal will have won. In the case of Jeffrey Epstein, we must continue to ask, lest the darkness of lies continue to conceal the light of truth forever. So it's very, very interesting, and none of it really makes sense. I mean, at surface level, it makes sense. You have the hidden supervillain's lair on an island in the middle of the ocean where you can get away with God knows what. But the particulars and the details of what exactly happened there, there's still so much mystery, and the whole place is just shrouded in this kind of dark veil of uncertainty. I wish I had the answers. We spent a long time researching the script, writing the script, putting the show together to present to you guys. At the end of the day, I mean, there are just so many things that we still don't know. But I have to once again draw the parallel to what was happening in the 1970s in Michigan with Frank Sheldon and North Fox Island. That's a story that you're going to see very soon that I'm deeply connected to at this point. People don't really understand the depth of that story, but it was almost like a trial run for Epstein. Epstein is kind of like the Frank Sheldon story meets the Franklin cover-up and combines into one massive cluster of evil. What are the odds that there are two islands in American history? Hopefully there's not going to be a third one, but I mean, I've talked about multiple here on the channel already, from Epstein's Island to Goree Island to Pitcairn Island, North Fox Island. I don't know. I mean, obviously you're so secluded that you're cut off from the rest of the world, but at the same time, you have those undercurrent thoughts of academic pederasty that were running through those circles, especially in the 70s, when a lot of this stuff was more socially acceptable than it obviously is today. What would really be healing and would really help, seal this case would be if we could get all the survivor stories from Epstein Island to tell us exactly what they know, exactly what happened, because there's still so much mystery. Who got away with what on the island? And I do want to remind you that we know, based on all these allegations, that there were more people than Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell involved in this. And yet the government convicted Maxwell of, and yet now they're saying that there really was no. And it's really hard to wrap your head around. It's frankly very disturbing stuff. But I'm going to keep making these videos because I think it's important to let people know about this stuff. So if you have enjoyed this deep dive with me, I know it's not really necessarily enjoyable, but if you've enjoyed the way that this information was presented, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, please follow the show wherever you're listening to this podcast. Please, if you're watching the video on YouTube, leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts. Make sure to like the video and share the video if you could. I have more deep dives on the Epstein thing coming soon. This is a story that I've been passionate about for years. I've read multiple books about all of this. I've gone through tons of documents. I've had very deep discussions with one of the leading experts on Epstein, and still, it's insane. It's insane to see the cover-up playing out live as an adult right now. Anyone with discernment, I feel, you're able to see that there is a cover-up going on here. And if you're really going to sit here and tell me that we should just listen to the government because they know best, I really don't know what to tell you, because that's an insane thought. Thank you guys for watching. Always question everything. Keep that tinfoil hat on, y'all. Stay suspicious, and I'll see you next week.